During the Civil War, the Morrill Act of 1862 was signed in order to provide states with land to build democracy's colleges, so that every American could benefit from having access to higher education. The dilemma was that after the Civil War was won by the Union, every American included women, Native Americans, recently freed enslaved people, and their descendants, all of whom the Confederates in the state of Missouri did not consider to be American, nor worthy of access to higher education. See, Columbia, Missouri was a battleground city where Union and Confederate armies were in constant conflicts. The very beginnings of the University of Missouri started off as a war encampment and seconded as a learning institution where soldiers from both sides battled for control. After Missouri seceded from the Confederacy, the land was utilized by turning the war encampment into a land-grant institution that banned black students and educators. In fact, the University of Missouri's first black student was not admitted until 1950, just shy of 100 years after the Morrill Act of 1862. Some abolitionists thought Confederate sympathizing states just needed some time to come to embrace the ideas of freedom and civil liberties for all, but racist ideologies and practices prevailed, especially for some Missourians, which prided in being the last slave state. As a response to racism, Lincoln University of Missouri was founded in 1866 by the 62nd and 65th Colored Infantries, and with the help of allies, was able to establish a viable institution which still stands today. Lincoln University is one of many historically black colleges and universities, also known as HBCUs, that were established in order to start rectifying the wrongs of those times and provide opportunities to once enslaved people. Now, let's fast forward a few decades to when the 1862 land-grant institutions approached the federal government for funding. Operating on small budgets, most institutions were struggling to stay open. The government saw this as a golden opportunity for equality and agreed to provide institutional funding on the conditions that all institutions allowed freed enslaved people to attend the colleges and universities. All southern states unanimously said no, and provisions were made to where each college must develop or choose a sister school that educates a black population and give each sister school a share of the land grant funding, thus giving birth to the 1890 Land Grant Initiative. The University of Missouri became the sister school of Lincoln University and agreed to supply Lincoln with fair and adequate funding allocated by the federal government. Unfortunately, the University of Missouri provided little to no assistance for decades, while receiving and keeping most of the funds. Land-grant HBCUs appealed successfully to the USDA directly in the late 1980s in order to receive funds directly from the government. The way it works is the federal government provides funds to land-grant institutions, and state governments are to make a financial decision to best match those funds. Only federal funds matched by the state government can be kept by the institution, so anything in excess must be returned to the federal government. Let's say the federal government issues you $1 and the state issues you the same, then you get $2. In contrast, if the federal government issues you $1 but the state issues you 50 cents, then you can only keep 50 cents in federal money and send the rest back to the federal government, leaving you with just $1. Taking economic scales into account, Lincoln University has been denied millions of dollars, which could have led to significant growth. The University of Missouri receives a significantly larger amount of funds from the federal government that is met by the state with a full match each year. Also, there's a lack of transparency when it comes to knowing the exact amount of funds received from both governments when it comes to white institutions. Lincoln University of Missouri, on the other hand, receives less money. Federal funds are not matched by the state, and funds are publicly reported. As a matter of fact, in 2018, the governor of Missouri's recommendation for Lincoln University's land grant was $0, while nothing is disclosed or itemized about the University of Missouri. With a $1.74 billion endowment, questions arise when it comes to why the University of Missouri continually receives undisclosed full funding and Lincoln University never receives matching funds. A study conducted in 2019 by the USDA confirmed there is a disparity when it comes to states matching federal funds. The study determined that all predominantly white institutions of the Morrill Act received full matching, while some of the predominantly black institutions of the Morrill Act lacked full funding. The irony of all this is that the Morrill Act and others that followed were created to even the playing field and allow all Americans the opportunity to better their lives. Yet state officials purposely have underfunded HBCUs systematically, keeping black people at a disadvantage. The underfunding of historically black colleges and universities is a battle that existed for more than 150 years. Lincoln University, with all the progress and growth, has done so with minimal resources and assistance that has systematically been created to set the institution of higher learning up for failure, while the University of Missouri system prospered. It's easy to say that this is all history and part of America's dark past. Unless you are presently experiencing Confederacy systems and political deeds of current politicians, what are all supposed to be the past? There are no needs for Civil War reenactments. When you look at Lincoln University, it's still the 1800s for them. So much for democracy, fairness, benefits, and access when it comes to the state of Missouri and Lincoln University.